Will the next big foldable phone be a slideable?
And can Huawei recover its reputation by appealing to everyday Australians? Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by CASA Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market. Hey, welcome back to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, the podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the big tech news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined by a man who was supposed to be jet setting his way to Mobile World Congress as we speak, Alex Kidman. Habla Española, Senor Kidman? Do you want a bag of peanuts and a sleep mask so you can kick back and imagine that you're in business class on your way to Barcelona?
Well, given a peanut allergy, probably not. But the whole MWC thing not happening, not my fault. But while we've steered clear of a lot of the coronavirus talk here at Vertical Hold, its effect is definitely starting to hit the tech world.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see. There's a few more things coming up in the next couple of months. It'll be interesting to see what gets bumped. We're also joined by a man with enough frequent flyer miles to get him to the moon and back, finder, editor-in-chief Angus Kidman. Gus, welcome back to the Vertical Hold Transit Lounge.
Thanks very much. I'll have a champagne and a Swedish massage, please.
Done. Right, so as we said, Mobile World Congress is officially off this year. The tech world's been in disarray this week, and so we're going to be looking at a whole mix of things. We're looking at Huawei trying to court everyday Aussies in its push to overturn the 5G ban, as well as the fact that Facebook's fact checkers are too few and far between to be credible. But first, Alex, you love a good foldable phone. Despite Mobile World Congress getting canned, there's a foldable phone in the news coming from TCL of all people.
Yeah, that's right, Adam. So MWC should have been a showcase of all sorts of foldable phones and presumably actual phones. So last year, there were a ton of foldable prototypes, everything from regular foldable phones to foldable screens in hats. And this year it was expected that we'd see actual phones that people might actually buy. And the latest leak is of a TCL prototype that instead of being a foldable phone, was more a kind of slide out phone. So when it's in its compact form, it looks like a regular everyday Android phone, but then the back of it sort of slides out to become a tablet. So similar conceptually to what you'd get with the Samsung Galaxy Fold, so tablet one style, phone the other, but with a very different kind of mechanism behind it.
But if it slides out from the back or the front, are you going to be left with a flat screen or like I can see a step in it, if you know what I mean?
Look, it's not entirely clear because what's been published so far are essentially just prototype images. It is not as though someone got hold of one of these things, did a YouTube video with it. It's just been strongly suggested that this was one of the things that TCL was likely to show off at Mobile World Congress. And of course, likely to show off could well mean it goes on sale next week, or it could well mean we're still building these out into workable devices. It certainly did that with its prototypes last year. So the stuff that it showed off at MWC, it showed off slightly more workable versions at IFA in that they seem to be actually running Android. It wasn't just, here's how the screen technology will work. It's, here's how this might work with Android when and if we bring it to market. So it could be very early days for this kind of technology. But there's a lot of kind of hanging questions around foldables as it is. Gus, would the concept of a slide-out phone appeal to you?
No, not really. I mean, I think I'd refer back to the great Kenny Rogers on this, that you've got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And I don't see what problem this is trying to solve other than saying, hey, we've come up with a novel way that people will talk about that having some kind of slide out screen that I'm not quite sure what benefit it's going to deliver.
To me, this seems like a throwback to the old Jazz Jam. Now, I don't know if people remember the Jazz Jam. We're talking in, the dark ages pre-iPhone, but the Jazz Jam was a big, thick, chunky Windows mobile phone. So that's, 3 strikes against it already. But the top of it would slide up, and then from underneath, the keyboard would slide down. And this was back in the days when people insisted they still needed a keyboard and when Windows Mobile still roamed the earth. But this was a very popular phone. So that idea of a phone that slides to get bigger is not new.
Well, except I think this is potentially solving for a different problem. This is trying to
Yeah.
be a tablet and phone all in one. I think at the right price, it might work. But I mean, we don't know what this TCL might have cost at all. But as we've already seen and discussed, in fact, Motorola and Samsung have their foldables. Samsung, of course, has multiples, but they're all quite expensive devices. TCL's rep, though, is in the cheap space, or at least in the affordable space, I should say. Shouldn't be that unkind to them. And perhaps they could bring this to market, because they still could, of course. Perhaps they could bring this to market at a more affordable price point. I think if you could bring this, to consumers at an appealing price point, I don't see people automatically going, no, I don't want that. But at that kind of $2,000 plus price, yeah, it's a much harder sell. Although this does segue beautifully into a story that we haven't really talked about, which is an affordable smartphone. Adam, how do you feel about buying a smartphone off the brother of a Colombian drug lord?
There's nothing in that sentence that I don't like. That just appeals to me on so many levels. Please tell me more.
So this is the Escobar Fold, and it's from the brother of Pablo Escobar, the drug lord. And it emerged largely in the...
Seriously, hang on, wait, we're not seriously. It is from the brother of that guy.
It is seriously from the brother of Pablo Escobar. And
Okay.
it emerged late last year. They're now up to the Escobar Fold 2. And this is a story with a little bit of everything, because the idea here is meant to be that, or his claim is that he's taking on Apple, he's taking on Samsung, he's going to kill them both. Now, when a drug lord says, or when the brother of a drug lord says he's going to kill you, you got to get worried straight away.
He knows people.
But they have actually, or it appears that they have actually shipped some of these things out to people. But where it gets really wacky is the Escobar Fold is, well, it's a phone that folds out into a tablet. It's got a smaller screen on the outside, $499 US. Now, does that remind you of anything in the foldable space?
The thing I was talking about the other week, where someone laughed at me if I asked it was a monochrome screen on the outside.
So that was, I believe, the Galaxy Flip. You're in the
Yeah.
right manufacturer, but not quite the right phone, because this thing sort of looks, or suggested to look, a bit like the Galaxy Fold. But when people actually got hold of them, they discovered that it was, in fact, the Galaxy Fold.
Nice.
One of those dodgy being made in the same Chinese factory, fell off the back of a truck kind of.
Well, given its provenance, I suspect it fell off the back of a truck might not be right. It's possible, of course, shotgun, balaclava, and a truck full of them could have been involved.
But
It's quite shamelessly a Samsung phone too, as well. Literally, what they've done is they've put some bodgy-looking gold foil on the back of this thing. The main
some little
screen
bit
is
of bling.
yeah, absolutely. The main screen is a picture of Pablo Escobar, but everything else is Samsung, including the boot
Yeah.
screens, the lot.
But this is a big problem in China where, with intellectual property, where you go to China to make something and suddenly all these other companies are selling budget versions of what you're doing because the factory basically just does an extra run and it falls off the back of the production line into someone's hands on the cheap. So it's not unheard of, is it?
No, look, it's not. No, I mean, I was reminded of this story by one of the analysts at Telsite this week, and I've got to give him a hat tip for reminding me. But he was kind of commenting that it was a bit odd that Samsung didn't have control over its own supply lines. For what it's worth, the Pablo phone company, as it's called, says that they're largely using returns and overstocks of the Galaxy Fold because people didn't want to buy it because it was too expensive. Now, I think there's perhaps a germ of truth in that, because the $3,000 for that phone is a bit much. And theoretically, while I'm not advocating necessarily that people go out and buy this thing, because even the website for this thing is kind of dodgy and in some ways not safe for work, but in some ways the idea of saying, well, hey, if we can bring this to market for $500 US, we'll make a killing. Is that the right term? So, Adam, it's been a rough few months for Huawei everywhere. Here in Australia, though, they're going on a bit of a charm offensive, aren't they? What's the story?
Yes, they've got a plan, and it's an interesting one. They're basically going on a town hall roadshow. So they're going around to, I think, some of the major cities and maybe some of the regional areas, and basically having a public forum, inviting members of the public to come along, ask questions. There'll be people from Huawei up on stage. I think they're recording it as podcasts, and they're really trying to get out there and basically win over the Australian public. Whether or not that is the way to go about it, I don't know, because it's not really the Australian public who makes the decisions on these things, but it is an interesting tactic. Gus, do you think they can see things change through this?
I think they've got to give it a red hot go. I mean, obviously there's a potential for it to go vastly, vastly wrong if
Oh,
some
yeah.
local excited rednecks think, oh, hey, good chance to go along and slag off a Chinese company. I think this could actually get very unpleasant very quickly. Um, Possibly they'll try and mitigate against that by inviting some of the local chambers of commerce, trying to stack the room a little bit. But I guess
Mm.
the point is not so much who shows up for it. It's can they get some coverage around it? Like, will they get some more news coverage? Will it allow them to sort of, have a bit of a visibility making that argument? And this presumably is why they're kind of, rolling out people like Nick Xenophon, the former South Australian politician who's involved in this whole thing. So but as you say, how much difference is it going to make because these policy decisions are getting made at government level, and it doesn't really feel like a vote winner one way or the other. It doesn't feel like the sort of thing that many people are going to get too upset about because the people who get most upset about 5G are the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists who would just believe that the network's going to destroy us. So I don't know that they're going to really be swayed by which manufacturer's involved because as far as they're concerned, it's all sick and evil.
Yeah, if I was Huawei though, and I was trying to win over the general public, I think my pitch would be, especially to people who live in regional areas, that is by banning Huawei from the rollout, they've made the rollout more expensive. And by making the rollout more expensive, that will reduce the coverage. And that's bad for regional Australia. So that's how I would pitch it if I was trying to convince Joe Blogs that, this is a bad idea.
Also, I'd give out a lot of free phones.
Yes, and I give out a lot of free phones.
But they've got a problem there, of course, because their business model in Australia is part phones, and that's got big problems because of the US trade ban, and part networks, and that's got big problems because of the Australian network ban. I mean,
Mm.
where does their business go if they can't sell network gear or Google ready phones?
Oh, maybe they could ask Mr. Escobar. I don't know.
I'm sure maybe one company that won't be vouching for them is TPG, because if Huawei was allowed back in, they might have to actually build that mythical fourth network.
The magical force network.
Well, with the merger, all but approved, we still haven't heard anything from the ACCC about them challenging that. The new TPG might not have to. I'm sure they'd probably like the idea of maybe getting some cheaper network gear, although they may well have, of course, signed all new, I think it's Nokia deals, if I remember correctly, that would mean they wouldn't be able to switch to Huawei at this point anyway.
Yes, there's so many unknowns and so much uncertainty around this, and it would suck if you're sitting there trying to do the business development plan for Huawei. There's not an obvious way that it's going to evolve, and no amount of town halling or hassling the US government or thinking that maybe they'll manage to get their foot in the door in the UK is really going to change that.
Is it another one of those cases of whatever they really do in Australia is irrelevant because we're just going to follow whatever the US does?
Eminently possible, eminently possible. But yeah, the domestic politics are a little bit different in both cases. So obviously they think it's worth having a crack, but whether any of it's going to help.
We've always done everything we can to try and protect those security alliances and like the Five Eyes agreements and stuff that we have, which is looking like a big problem with the UK when they're saying that they'll use Huawei, and the US is like, well, we don't know if we want to share info with you anymore. I don't think Australia's politicians are brave enough to play that game.
It seems highly unlikely based, on, as you say, on historical precedent that we tend to value that alliance amongst most other things when it comes to international politics. So, indeed, in that sense, they may well just remain in lockstep.
I think Huawei, though, they're going to have to fight very, very hard. I mean, also this week, their US court challenge to the whole ban basically got kicked out of court. The judge basically said, no, look, Congress has acted within its powers. This is all proper and correct, which is certainly not the result that Huawei would have wanted to get. And what's more, it's also being reported by Reuters that the US is looking into tightening that trade ban such that foreign chip manufacturers wouldn't be able to supply chips to Huawei, at which point its smartphone business is generally imperiled. Even its networking business is not looking too healthy either.
But see, here's where you have to ask the question. Are they going to stop Lenovo using US chips and Alcatel and Oppo? Because if they're not targeting all Chinese companies the same, I mean, you can argue that Huawei has a special, relationship with the Chinese government. That's fair enough. But it does seem like they're just going out of their way to hurt Huawei as much as they can without necessarily being consistent in a way that they should be if this was really about security and not a trade war.
I'm worried that you've just given Mr. Trump an idea right there, Adam, that there's a bunch more companies he should be banning. So, yeah.
But that's the thing, is like, it wouldn't be that hard for him to do that. The fact that he's not doing that tells you a lot.
Well, I don't know. Look, I'm totally spitballing here because I don't know, but I
It's
could
never stopped us before.
sure, I could certainly say that Huawei's position is quite different. I mean, Lenovo and Oppo and Alcatel are not in those versions of them are not in the networks business in Australia, in the US. Huawei is. If it was just the phones, then yeah, I think you'd have an absolute case to answer there. But Huawei's positioning and some of the stories one hears about Huawei, I could see the logic behind saying no, Huawei is a particular case. They've certainly done it before. They did this with ZTE, and that was
Mm.
based around more concrete dealings with prohibited companies, which I don't believe is the case for Huawei's position here. But as Gus said before, there's so many unknowns about this. There's so many, oh, trust us, there are genuine security concerns. And Huawei's position certainly is, hey, show us this evidence, prove that this is the case. And it could be one of those instances where, yeah, as you say, it's trade war. It could be one of those instances where the nature of the security information is such that it's not easy to do in that way, but it's still credible.
So, Alex, how many Facebook facts would a Facebook fact checker check if a Facebook fact checker would check facts on Facebook?
Well, Adam, the answer, it turns out, is probably less than you might think. So Gus, I'm going to play a little game with you here. Facebook obviously has been on a huge PR offensive talking about trust and veracity of information on Facebook and how its systems are so much better at weeding out bad information. So, in Australia, little old Australia, how many fact checkers do you think they're actually employing?
Well, I would really hope that the answer would be somewhere in at least three figures.
For a population of, what, 17 million users, I think, in this country, you'd hope so.
So, we're going somewhere in the hundreds. Give me a number. Give me a number.
314.
Right. So I've got to tell you, the answer is quite a bit lower than that. Give me another number, bit lower.
214.
You're not accelerating down anywhere near as fast as I need you to. Give me another number, quite a bit lower.
42.
42 is a beautiful number, and you might be surprised to learn that it's still too many. The answer is 7.
Well done, everyone.
Well done, everyone. Absolutely. It's a fabulous number, but according to a BuzzFeed report this week, across all of Australia, there are 7 people whose job is Facebook fact checker. And when you consider the quantity, we were talking about, wacky 5G conspiracy theories, tons of those on Facebook, wacky virus, wacky racism, wacky political, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, the number of groups and memes and falsehoods that propagate, those must be some
Well, you
busy
would hope
7
so, but
people.
in fact, the output, because Facebook don't employ fact checkers themselves, I believe. The setup is actually they're using people from other agencies. In this case, I think it's Associated Press, where they manage to get through about one fact check every day because it's much, much harder to do the fact checking than it is to just lie. So it's definitely a case where the scale just seems completely out on this sort of stuff.
What does that do for trust in Facebook, though? I mean, I'm sure this is not a number that they want to have out there in the wild.
Well, like most Facebook, it's not a good look. The reality is that the vast majority of people aren't going to notice it. When we think of all the scandals that Facebook's been through, when you think of all the Cambridge Analytics stuff and all the rest of it, did any of this result in Facebook's user numbers dropping? No, because most people who are sitting on Facebook are never going to encounter the fact that they've only got 7 fact checkers because it's unlikely to get shared and go viral in that way.
This is your reminder, listeners, that you're more than welcome to share this episode of Vertical Hold on Facebook until they fact check it. So, Gus, Facebook's other solution for a lot of this would appear to be automated systems and AI. Do you think there's a role for that kind of thing in fact checking, or should it be a human activity? Should they just throw more bodies at the problem?
It needs to be a mixture. Yeah, realistically, when Facebook's saying, oh, look, it's really hard for us to deal with this stuff and we have to be cautious, it's a lot of that is self-serving gump because obviously when it comes to stuff that could cause them real immediate legal problems, they manage to block it off. So they manage to get rid of, most of the really offensive terrorism content, the child porn, things like this. So they're clearly, when they have to, they get to solving it, and it's very hard to avoid the conclusion that when they're not solving it so quickly, it's just because they're like, well, no, we still, we get an involved, engaged audience with this stuff, so we don't necessarily want to get rid of them. I think ultimately, yes, to write up a fact check is always going to require a level of humans, but I think in terms of flagging this stuff, in identifying trends, they could go a lot further with both tech and with resources to get to that. And it's really hard to avoid the conclusion that there is just a lot of Zuckerberg self-serving going on here.
And if you threw AI at the problem, it doesn't need to be making the hard judgment calls. What you do is you get AI to deal with the easy ones. You get AI to deal with the ones that are blatant lies, and you get AI to deal with the ones that are clearly true. And then the ones that it's not sure about, it hands over to a real person. So that way, there's still people making the important decisions, but it really cuts down. It means they can get through them a lot more quickly. That's generally how AI is applied for all kinds of things like cancer checks and stuff like that. AI doesn't decide, oh, this is cancer. AI gets rid of the ones that's clearly not, and then a doctor looks at the rest. That's how you do it.
Absolutely. And while Facebook could do this, I'm going to put it out there that it's probably not going to be inclined to do this unless it's forced to. So, with that in mind, Gus, if there is this much false information, what do you think people should do when they're confronted with a Facebook story? How do individuals pick the real stuff?
Well, the problem individuals should be, look, you shouldn't take anything you see on Facebook, particularly at face value. You should always be a critical reader and say, hang on, what's the evidence for this? But of course, it doesn't work like that. We're primed as humans to want to believe the things we want to believe, and we gravitate towards what we see as evidence for that. And being told that we're wrong often just results in us locking down that even more. So it's a thorny problem. There's not some obvious solve, because even if every inaccurate fact on Facebook was being flagged, there is the risk that someone would go, oh, well, no, they're just biased and this is obviously true anyway. So it's not easy, but it would be nice to see a little bit more effort going into it.
Well, folks, once again, that about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Gus for making time for the show this week.
Thanks very much, Adam. Your massage skills are really improving.
Thank you.
I so didn't need to see that. But Gus, if people do need to find your writing or your good self online, where can they do that?
They can find me online at finder.com.au or on Twitter, GusWorldAU.
And you can catch up with us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And thanks everyone for tuning in again. Remember, we're on a big subscriber push this year, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button, tell your friends, and leave us a review so we can help spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market. So, Alex, how many Facebook fact checkers would a Facebook fact check? No. So, Alex.
What are you doing?
So, this is my ultimate test for winging it, all right? If I can do this, I can do anything. So, Alex, how many Facebook facts would a Facebook fact checker check if a Facebook fact checker would check Facebook facts? Almost. That's as good as it's going to get.
All
right, give me one more go.